Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session of MGS GVC 1.0. We have with us today Dan Morris, who is a senior manager at DraftKings, and he'll be speaking on getting down to brass tacks in programmatic buying. So also feel free to use the public chat to ask your questions to Dan or the Q&As. And now I'll turn the time over to you, Dan. Thanks again.
Thank you. How's it going, everyone? I want to talk to you guys about programmatic. So about me, started in digital marketing when I was 19. I was working at an affiliate network. I actually, not to date myself, but I was buying on AdMob pre-Google acquisition. I was the second employee at Fractional Media, which was acquired by Machine Zone in May of 2015. And I helped them grow into one of the top spending DSPs over my 3 years at Machine Zone to over $1 billion profitably. I would consider myself an expert in mobile attribution, gaming, and fraud. I've done a lot of testing and research on this, and I started at DraftKings in August of 2019. So what is programmatic? I figured I would define it. It feels like a buzzword a lot. So in my opinion, what I would say programmatic is a mechanism to buy into the display inventory space. There's a lot of other channels, including that are involved in that space, like FAN, UAC, and ad networks. Programmatic offers you the greatest control, flexibility, and transparency as a buyer out of all those. You can bid on each impression individually. You get the logs of everything if you have an internal DSP connection. And you can also, all the creatives serve as HTML, which offers a lot of flexibility that I think is a really important part of programmatic advertising, and I'll discuss a little bit later. So should your company buy programmatic? You have to understand that it's really like high risk, high reward. It's very resource intensive. You probably need some data scientists, a lot of creative resources. And there's a lot of pitfalls. There's a lot of things like bid floors that play into it that if you have no experience with programmatic, will definitely be a hard learning experience to figure out. And quality inventory is pretty expensive. So if your company doesn't have the LTV and conversion rates to support the high CPMs that you're going to see in the programmatic space, it might not even make sense for you to get involved in programmatic. So let's say you made the decision, you talked to your company, you decided you wanted to buy programmatically. This is what I think the steps you would need to take to succeed. They're kind of sequential, starting with the emphasis on measurement. If you're not measuring properly, I think that it's very hard to find success. You have to understand what you're buying, and you have to find traction. And I think that's the hardest part. After that, scaling is important, and then protecting your scale and maintaining it, and making sure that you can defend yourself against any possible competitors. So for the emphasis on measurement, we have to start. I think it makes sense to start to talk a little bit about fraud and attribution gaming to get an idea of like how mobile attribution works. So I have a couple different types of fraud. In bold, that's stuff that more taps into your organics. The first one I have is impression fraud. That is more of, are you getting served fake impressions? I'm not really too concerned with that one because usually a feedback loop will take care of that. Then you have click spamming, which I think most people are familiar with at this point, just firing attribution claims, hoping to claim an organic install. You have a lot of fingerprint abuse going on where you can target like high density IP addresses and just hope that one claim turns into multiple claims, and that kind of plays on how fingerprint attribution works. There's click injection, and that's when like the APK in an Android app can read what files are being installed and then fire a click claim right before the app is installed to try and get attribution for that install that they're seeing come in. There's also VTA spamming, which is very interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. And there's SDK spoofing, which I'm actually not an expert at. So I'm just going to avoid talking about that one for now. So for VTA spamming, I ran a test at DraftKings where I noticed we had a top performing app that was running a 320 by 50 placement. So what I did was I took our top performing 320 by 50 ad, this orange ad over here on the left, and I went into Microsoft Paint and exported a 320 by 50 sized just white rectangle, and I ran an A/B test on that. And below you can see the results of it. So you have view and click attribution, click only attribution, and view attribution. And you can see that it performed very similarly. For the 320 by 50 real ad, there were 17 installs, and there were 16 installs for the blank rectangle. For the click only, it's kind of interesting because there's a higher click-through rate. You kind of expect that because I'm showing a white ad and there's a lot of white background apps out there, and maybe that's the user accidentally clicked on it because they couldn't see it. They couldn't actually avoid the creative. But we're also getting installs on the click. That's just like a click spam effect too. And then you have the view only. And the view only performed pretty much identical, 15 installs and 15 installs on VTA attribution between the two ads. I didn't post the post-install events in here, but they were also very similar. So yeah, this I think is showing you an effect that exists of tabbing organics, and how you can get results just almost by accident, right? So that kind of brings me to like a harsh reality of mobile advertising. Mobile attribution is fundamentally flawed, and it's only going to get worse. IDFA is going to get deprecated, and fingerprints, I believe, like wildly inaccurate. So, like, how do you hit your goals? You have to understand, like, your goals can be hit numerically, and they can be hit numerically without driving any incremental value at all. And that's kind of what I was trying to show with the test in the previous slide. So if you want to buy in programmatic and be successful and be competitive when you're bidding, you have to understand what your baselines are. So like if you were to run your own blank ad test with any placement that you're buying now, how would that performance differ from your just like active media buys or your active media buying? And then you got to have discipline too, right? You have to understand that like you can delude yourself with the data that you're receiving. So you should be really conservative when you're picking or selecting data sets that you want to do analysis on for optimization, or data sets that you want to use for modeling. I like to be very conservative. I remove all VTA. I look at a very small time to install window to eliminate any like click injection stuff or any latent installs. Definitely take out any fingerprint installs. And I always attribute to the time of impression. So all of my post-install events get tied to a time of impression, so I can see from the spend that I did on that particular day what the result was. And you want to do this again just to avoid creating or optimizing towards attribution, which is very possible to create like an attribution model where you'll be bidding more for like advantageous attribution opportunities than actual results. Okay, so that was the measurement, and this is more of like know what you're buying. So when you're buying programmatic, you have to really kind of understand like the mindset of users and what apps they're playing or what you're buying. So I really recommend that you go in there and you use the apps, like the top apps that you're buying or the apps that you're looking at buying, and just kind of get an idea of like what mindset your users in when the ad actually shows. A lot of it's like they're in a game, they hit some sort of checkpoint or they beat a level or something, and that's when the ad gets triggered and shown to the user. And users really don't like ads. They don't want to see them. They're annoyed by them. They just want to get back to what they were doing prior to that. And you have to understand that because that'll help you to figure out like how to make a creative. Like they're not going to sit there and read a paragraph that you put in your ad. You have to really capture their attention. You also want to see like what other advertisers are running on programmatic in general, and just get like a better idea of, is this similar to what I'm doing? And just to see like what strategies they're running. You want to get an idea of the waterfall, and that's kind of what the screenshot is. There's an ad here, and if you click on the top right, there's a little eye, and it'll show you, this is from Facebook. It says Facebook Audience Network. And that was the first impression I saw in the app that I was testing. So I know that the waterfall right now, if I wanted to get the top impression, I probably have to put some sort of deal in place to get above Facebook, or at least try to get above Facebook in the waterfall. And you also want to make sure you're on top of like the different creative functionality that people are doing. So you can see like in this one, this was just like a regular video, but it's kind of interesting. It kind of has like a playable feel to it. They have a little finger here to show you how the game works or potentially how the game works. and are they using anything like a playable end card? It's all stuff that you want to check out because you never know what you're going to find, and it might be interesting to you. So I would recommend just making sure you're playing the apps. And then you also want to make sure you're testing your own ads in a live environment. You want to make sure it works as expected. You can see here I have a screenshot of one of our ads. This was a scratchable interactive ad, which I'll show you guys later. But you can see that through the SDK of one of the SSPs we're running on, it didn't load properly and it didn't fit to screen the different assets that make up this ad. And I probably could have drawn it out better, but there's a little blue right angle here at the bottom that shows you where the asset ends and there's a background. But you just never know how the different ads you have are going to interact with the SDKs or with the advertising templates or the creative templates that your different DSP partners might have. So I really recommend to target your own device and test it out and make sure that everything works. Especially you see here the click-through, it's kind of like, it should go without saying, but I've seen so many times in the past that this be the cause of problems that could have been eliminated if the ad was just tested properly at the beginning. You also want to make sure you're buying what you're expecting to buy. If you have deals in place with publishers, you can just trust them, or I'm more like to go out there and test and make sure that if I'm buying first look, I'm getting the first impression. So I definitely recommend doing that. And you also want to see if the transition makes sense for the context of that app. And that's not an app-to-app basis and could depend on your creative, but it's just something to consider when you're looking at your creatives in the wild. Okay, so now let's talk about finding traction, which is probably the hardest part of programmatic. There's a couple different points I think that should be made for this. The first one is how to find traction with creative. You need a really strong creative strategy. Again, it goes back to the users do not want to see your ads. They're not interested. They're not going to read. So how are you going to capture their attention? And to start, you definitely want to focus on what has the highest probability of success. For me, that's video and interstitial, anything full screen, because you're going to have 100% of the user can't do much else when those advertising, when those placements are on their screen. So probably just start there, and then when you find something that's working, you can test smaller advertisements that maybe don't take up the full screen. But just for the highest probability of success, you probably want to focus on interstitial or video, anything that's full screen. And then you can look at things you can do to grab the user's attention. I'm a big fan of playables and interactive ads. Videos are pretty good also. But in my experience and from what I've seen, you want to do small, subtle animations. You want to make your ad look more less like an ad and more like an actual experience. And you can do that with subtle animations. You can do that with tutorials that show the user or walk the user through the experience. Pointers that's part of a tutorial that help guide the user through what you're trying to show them. And again, you want to avoid words. I just don't think that you're going to see very many users read through very lengthy, wordy advertisements. You also want to make sure you make most of the ad functionality offered to you. There's different video settings that you play around with. There's a vast video close, I actually meant to write vast video click there. And what that means is when the video is running, can the user actually click on the video? And I like to remove that because the users have found out over time that sometimes you can click on the video. When you click on the video, the ad ends, so it's a way around watching the full 15 seconds or 30 seconds you're allocated for a video placement by getting out, by clicking on it, and then going back to your ad. So removing that, I think it makes it more likely for the user to go through the whole video and maybe get the messaging you're trying to convey to them. You also want to have end cards in place. So if you have a 15-second video placement and the 15 seconds ends and you don't have an end card in place, the user just immediately gets thrown back into the app that they're using before. If you have an end card in there, you can extend that 15 seconds to 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and give them additional messaging that they can then, you put CTAs in there, buttons for them to click on, just more ways for them to get out of the ad and into the app store or into your landing page. So I definitely recommend doing video settings. or end cards. For interstitials, close buttons are important. You want to make sure you're taking advantage of that. In my testing, if you have an immediate close button versus like the 5-second that most SSPs offer you, I've seen stuff where it's like 4 times higher click-through rates. And for iteration, I'm of the opinion that you should always be testing huge changes and kind of avoid small changes. And by huge changes, I mean the performance would differ by 100% or greater. You want to avoid things like pretty much every company I've worked through wanted to test closed button colors, but I've never really seen any huge lift with that. You want to test bigger changes than that, so you can get a better idea of what direction to go when you're iterating on your ads or on your creatives. So I have an example of an iteration that we did, and I think like this could even be a stronger. We could have even done better on this than what we have. So what this is a dynamic ad that pulls from our sportsbook API feed and pulls in live odds. And we had the initial assumption on the left here. This is version 1, where we could show one line and we would show, say if I was in New England and I would show the Patriot spreads to someone in New England because they'd be more likely to be interested in that than anything else. We did some testing around that and found that wasn't the case. And instead of trying to then predict the user's preference on what type of event they wanted to bet on, we just made the creative have 3 lines in it to just increase the probability that would show the user something they were interested in. So this is just an example of what I was talking about when you want to make something very different. And it did turn out that the one on the right worked better. Okay, so we already talked about creatives. I want to talk about a concept that I call angles. So angle is a combination of creative messaging, contextual relevance, targeting, just a combination of different things to kind of show the user something at the right time, show the right user the right messaging at the right time. So it's not a great example, but my example that I had here was we have a casual game playable ad, and we know that there's a user that we've seen on multiple different casual games over time. And we can target them with a high session depth. And the assumption there is that we know this user plays casual games. We know they're not loyal to casual game. They switch around to different games. And the high session depth is maybe at this point they're bored of the game they're playing. So it might be an opportunity to show them a new ad or a new casual game they can play by giving them the experience of the playable and having them make the decision then if they like it or not, and can come out and download it if they make that decision. I would definitely recommend doing that over doing something like having a generic creative and running a network. And another thing that I wanted to talk about was eliminating variables and complexity, especially when you're initially starting out. You want to start small. You don't want to connect to every SSP to begin with. You want to maybe choose like 1 or 2, just because there's just like so many nuances with different SSPs in terms of like how the creatives interact with the different SDKs that are in place. So you just want to eliminate as many variables and just find something that works before you start to expand out and bring on the additional effort that is involved in managing those different SSPs. I would recommend making like whitelist. You don't have to buy every publisher. Just like go out there and use your intuition and figure out like what potentially would work for the advertiser or for your product, right? And it should be pretty easy to find some of it. And it's way better to start there than by every publisher on the exchange. I would focus on 1 or 2 ad sizes that, like I already discussed in the previous slides. Probably limit the device models and OS versions. Remove tablets and only focus on phones to start. And definitely, so DraftKings is mostly US advertising, but if you have like a product that's global, I would recommend focusing on a couple of geos just to remove some of the variables in terms of localization in different languages and things like that. That could just be another strain that would delay you from finding a result that you can then iterate on. And you want to make sure you concentrate your testing, because I assume that no one out there has unlimited budgets. So you want to focus what the resources you have on the test that will be most impactful or will give you the most information on how to proceed after that test is over. So we're at a point right now. I want to show you what it looks like from what I believe, like when you have real traction. So this is a graph of our installs by week for about the past year. And you can see, like, at the end, we're obviously doing way higher volume, but I wanted to point out things like I work at DraftKings. The biggest season for us is NFL season. So on this chart, labeled 1 is the beginning of NFL season. 2 is the Super Bowl, which there was a pretty significant bump there, especially relative to all the performance before that. And then 4 is probably the second week of April, when we launched one of our playable ads for our casino product, which is crazy to think about because there's no sports live at this point, and we're seeing higher volume than the Super Bowl. And that to me is an indication of this is traction. Whatever we're doing right now is probably the most amount of success that we've had thus far. So we should focus on that. And that's when you get to 4s, because we're focusing on it and looking to scale it and iterate on it. So I wanted to share that example that I lost. There we go. So what we saw when we launched that is our channel volume was 10 times higher than Super Bowl levels. We had an IPM installed per 1,000 impressions, an order of magnitude higher than before. And we also we saw, post-install funnel ratios decline, which is kind of expected, and that plays back into the whole measurement portion of this, where if you're tapping into organic installs before, organic installs are the most likely to convert. So it makes sense that if you actually have real traction, you're going to see lower post-install funnel metrics, because users that you acquired will drop off. Cool. So here's a picture of our ads that we're running. I have a video I can show you quick. I'm running out of time though, I think. This is one of our playables we have that mimics our blackjack product. You can see, like, there's a tutorial there, there's pointers, there's animations when you put the chips in there. It's walking the user through the experience. And I'm going to skip the other one just for the sake of time. All right, so you have traction. How do you scale? You pretty much start to unrestrict the variables that you tied down at the beginning. You open up more SSPs, you put more publishers on your whitelist. You can start increasing your bids and seeing if you can get higher up in the waterfall. You can start to test new ad sizes, given what you've seen for the strategy working. If you restricted your geos, you can start to expand those and test some localization. And you can also, at this point, I think it makes sense to start looking at data plays. Like, you're starting to get actual data and actual traction, so you can compare things. Like, if you wanted to run a third-party data partner, you can A/B test them and see if that actually is working. And you start to do interesting things with bid modeling once you have traction and are getting real data. And then maintaining scale. After you achieve scale, you want to be in a position to defend yourself. So you have to understand what your best segments are. You want to check to see how they change over time if you're losing them, and you want to just monitor them. And then if you do see a competitor, you can do different things. Like, you can try to outbid them. You can try to raise their second price to make them more expensive and maybe push them out of the segment you want to protect. Or you can work with publishers and get deals in place to help you defend that. And it's kind of cliche, but you also want to never stop learning. As you iterate and as you improve and you get more efficient, that enables you to increase your bids, better protect, and explore, like, new segments that might work for you in the future. You definitely want to stay up to date with any industry changes or any SSP changes or any new functionality that's coming out, because the biggest performance increases I've seen in the past have come from running new creative functionality or new functionality. And last thing, the future, just pretty much Twitter buys MoPub, AppLovin buys MZ. SSPs are switching to first price auctions, which is going to change some of your bidding strategies. And Facebook and Google are encroaching on the display space. So that's stuff to look out for. And I don't think I have time for a Q&A, but thanks for the time, everyone. I hope I gave you some good information.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much, Dan. Thanks again for coming and speaking with us. And yeah, we'll meet you all at the next session. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks. Bye.